Everyone has had some kind of an experience feeling something kind of like fear of heights, and it makes perfect common sense that we shouldn't jump over the edge of a drop-off because it's dangerous, and if it's dangerous, then we should probably be afraid of it.
Probably. Exactly how and when this hypothetical fear develops makes for pretty gleeful research inside Dr. Karen Adolph's lab.
We're discovering some surprising things that are flying in the face of, how people have studied locomotion for the last 100 years.
Including what babies do and feel when they're on a ledge.
So the story about fear of heights is that there was a very, very famous classical study in developmental psychology by Gibson and Locke in 1960 that showed that human infants and infants of a number of different species will avoid crossing over an apparent drop-off on what they called a visual cliff.
As soon as the baby can move about, he can be observed in the same way as other animals.
It's a glass table, and on one side there's a checkerboard pattern surface right under the glass. The other side of the table, the pattern surface is way down on the floor. So visually, it looks like a big 3-foot drop-off. So when human babies first begin crawling, most of them will crawl over the apparent drop-off, but after several weeks of crawling experience, then they'll begin to refuse to crawl over the drop-off. And the conventional interpretation of this was that infants are avoiding the drop-off because they're afraid of heights.
She's backing away very
No, she's not interested.
She wants no part of that side.
The experiment became the shaky foundation for the myth that crawling innately teaches us to fear heights.
Babies avoid going over the drop-off because they're afraid of heights. How do we know they're afraid of heights? Because they avoid crawling over the drop-off. So as you may have noticed, the argument is circular.
As it happened, the visual cliff was a better test of an infant's depth perception, not their fear of heights. And if you look closely, you may have actually noticed that the babies don't look particularly scared.
It is a perfectly safe surface of support. So after one trial, human infants cleverly figure this out, and then they will crawl over the drop-off.
So how do you really test if a baby is scared of heights?
You can test babies at the edge of a real cliff where there's no safety glass. It's just an actual drop-off, and the drop-off can be adjustable, so it can be little or really, really big.
And why stop there? Inside Dr. Adolph's Infant Action Lab, babies are tested on a variety of apparatuses.
You can test babies at the edge of a slope, so it can be steeper, 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 crossing bridges that are wide or narrow over a surface of support, and so on. If there's no safety glass, you can test the same baby dozens and dozens of trials in the same session. And that means that you can determine for each individual infant when they think that that surface is safe and when they think it's risky within a couple of degrees of accuracy, like 2 degrees of accuracy for a slope.
Dr. Adolph has spent 25 years running tests like these, and the resulting data sets are both convincing and adorable.
Infants spend most of each trial right at the edge of the precipice. They're reaching their arm down over the drop-off. They are putting their little feet or their little hands on the bridge and taking little tiny steps at the edge. And all the while they're doing it with either neutral or positive facial expressions.
What's more surprising is how their approach changes as they learn different forms of locomotion.
So what happens is that when babies first begin crawling, they'll crawl right over the edge. Then over weeks of crawling, their responses get more and more accurate until finally they're at adult-like levels so that they can tell precisely whether a slope is safe for crawling or whether a drop-off is safe for crawling. But then the next week, when these babies stand up and face these same drop-offs, same slopes, same apparatus, now as a new walker, they walk right over the edge. So in fact, there seems to be 4 learning curves in development as babies learn to sit, learn to crawl, as they learn to cruise, and then finally as they learn to walk. So if they were afraid of heights, you should just be afraid of heights. In the rain and on a train and in a tree, you shouldn't see 4 separate learning curves.
So if babies aren't learning to be afraid of heights, what are they learning?
I think that what babies are learning over weeks of sitting, crawling, cruising, walking, is they're learning to perceive the relations between their bodies and the environment.
They're discovering what's possible and what's just a little too far.
And you can learn that without feeling any sort of fear at all. In fact, Eleanor Gibson, the person who first invented the visual cliff, wrote later in her life, as a goat is peering over the edge of a steep crag, it knows not to walk off the edge. And she said, I don't think it's feeling any emotions at all. It just knows not to go. And that's what we're seeing in babies.
Who probably know not to go. Probably. For Science Friday, I'm Luke Groskin.